Bienvenidos. Welcome to Finding and Using Data. My name is Gabriela Baeza Ventura. I am Associate Professor of Spanish in the Department of Hispanic Studies and Executive Editor at Arte Público Press and co-founder of US Latino Digital Humanities Program at the University of Houston, with Dr. Carolina Villarroel, Brown Foundation Director of Research at the Recovering the US Hispanic Literary Heritage Program. Our team also includes Dr. Linda Garcia Merchant, US Latino Digital Humanities Postdoctoral Fellow, and Dr. Lorena Gauthier, former CLEAR Mellon postdoc and now Digital Programs Manager. My colleagues and I stand on the shoulders of the Recovery Program founders, scholars, activists, librarians, and community members who, along with the founder and director of Arte Público Press and Recovery, Dr. Nicolás Canelos, have fought against the erasure of the history and legacy of the Latino people of the United States. Their mission, and some of our board members are here, including Dr. Clara Lomas, was one of social justice, to right the wrongs in a historical record that did not include Latina and Latino voices, and to write, as in the act of writing, documenting those missing voices into historical, literary, and cultural discourse. Empowered by their activism and the impressive amount of data revealed by the research, we founded the US Latino Digital Humanities Program to extend their goals and mission beyond printed media, to incorporate innovative digital articulations representing both traditional and non-traditional forms of virtual visualization and scholarship. USLDH was founded in part with a generous grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and a CLEAR postdoctoral fellowship. The Mellon Foundation continues to support our mission by funding workshops such as this. We are grateful for their support. The goals of the USLDH program include serving as a physical space for the development, support, and training in digital humanities projects using the recovery collection of newspapers, photographs, and digital materials, to create opportunities and facilities for digital publication of Latino-based projects and scholarship. As a 2019 recipient of the Manifold Digital Services Pilot Program, we recently celebrated the launch of APP Digital through the Manifold platform to reinforce our strategy of introducing texts in both English and Spanish to a new generation of scholars, both in the classroom and the community. USLDH also exists to promote and foster interdisciplinary work, scholarly work with our immediate communities in and outside academia, across the nation and internationally, to provide a communal virtual space to share knowledge and projects related to Latina and Latino digital humanities, and to establish a Latino DH hub to document the rich digital activity produced by Latina and Latino scholars, cultural practitioners, and technicians, both nationally and transnationally. It is through all these activities that we continue to work in the recovery, dissemination, and preservation of our history. For if we recover our past, we create our future. We invite you to follow Recovery social media to stay up to date on our resources and events, and to use the hashtag USLDH to tweet about projects and resources related to US Latino digital humanities, such as our recent call for grants and aid applications. Please look that up and apply. Moreover, we ask you that you please save the date for a virtual lecture by Dr. Paige Morgan, which is scheduled on Monday, January 25th at 2 p.m. Central Time, under different times. And we hope that everybody, I should have asked before this, I hope that everybody is doing well during these times. In the past, we would have brought Dr. Paige Morgan to Houston and treated her to wonderful Texas cuisine. But unfortunately, we have to do this virtually, so we get to see everybody's faces in this way. Today's workshop is led by Dr. Morgan, who is a digital publishing and copyright librarian and head of digital scholarship and publishing services at the University of Delaware Library, Museum, and Press. She previously worked at the University of Miami Libraries as digital scholarship librarian and scholarly publishing officer, and as a CLEAR postdoctoral fellow at the Lewis and Ruth Sherman Center for Digital Scholarship at McMaster University. In the past 10 years, the Dr. Mighty Morgan has worked within the field of digital humanities in several capacities as a researcher, instructor, data wrangler, and community curriculum builder. You can find her writing at DH and Lib archive journal, romanticism, and in college and undergraduate libraries. Another thing about logistics, Dr. Morgan will speak. She'll do her workshop, and then there'll be a section for question and answers throughout the workshop. And so she'll give you instructions as to how to proceed during those times. But if it gets overwhelming with the questions, the USLDH team will step in and help monitor those questions so that everybody's questions will get answered and registered. We will save the chat, and this recording will be made available to you all for your classes and for your communities as well. So without further ado, thank you, Dr. Morgan. Thank you to my colleagues at USLDH for all the work in putting this together, and let's get into data wrangling.
Okay, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Thanks to all of you for turning out, and big thanks to USLDH for inviting me to be here today. I am so excited about this. I have such fond memories of meeting Caro, I think 3, maybe 4 years ago at DHSI, and this has been in the works for a long time. So even though I am so sorry not to be actually in Texas stuffing myself with barbecue, I am thrilled to be able to be reaching so many of you today. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my slides, which have also been showing up in the chat. And I'm actually going to keep them in this view rather than in the presenter view, just because it's easier to move between tabs. So to start, there's a survey that I think a bunch of you have already been filling out, but I'm going to throw it into the chat once more. This is just something I almost always start workshops with large groups with some sort of survey, just to try and get a better sense of where people are. We'll look at the results in a few minutes. So first, some key goals for today. One, I want to give you several places and several techniques for looking for data. But the other main part of this is that when we start finding data, and when we look for it, I want you to be able to start thinking critically about what we're actually seeing, as opposed to thinking, oh my gosh, that's a huge spreadsheet. Because just being overwhelmed by the bigness of the spreadsheet isn't going to help you so much. We're going to cover some of the fitness of any data that you find for your research. We're going to think about some of the ethics involved and start thinking about, well, if you need to modify a data set for your use, what do you need to do? I want to note too that today I'm really gearing this workshop towards the idea of finding data that's in spreadsheets. Those of you who have worked with data before might say, yeah, data comes in lots of different forms, not just spreadsheets. That's true. But for folks who are starting out and who are interested in using a variety of tools, including Omeka, Tableau, ArcGIS, other story maps, many of those tools work with spreadsheets. And so that's one reason I'm focusing on them. Another is that getting used to working with data in a spreadsheet is a great first step before you get started working with data that's, say, in a much larger or more complex relational or non-relational database. So today is going to be a lot about spreadsheets. Even if you work with textual data, for example, if you are working with all of Borges' short stories or something like that, you would still, in many cases, be dealing with spreadsheets. So this workshop is still for you. So to start, a really basic thing that people often ask me, and I remember when I didn't know the answer to this, is what's data? And what's the difference between data and a data set? So let's talk about this. I like defining I like defining the difference between data and a data set with pictures, which is why we've got this. So data can be so many sorts of things. All of you who registered for this workshop, all your names and email addresses would constitute data. Your institutions would be part of that data. If we asked you in the course of this workshop, what's your favorite television show? That could also be data, but some of you would say, well, I don't watch TV. Will you take my favorite book? The point that I'm trying to make here is that we could make data out of so many things, and it would be like a huge potluck, this bowl of trail mix mixed together from different snacks on the left. That's data. It can be really messy. A data set, on the other hand, to some degree, implies that there was some intention in putting it together, that there was some effort made to make sure that all the data fit, that it was meant to be cohesive. That's one way of thinking about it. I do want to note that about a week ago, there was a really popular image that I kept on seeing on my Twitter and social media feeds. And that was from Michael Sell, who teaches in Copenhagen. He was saying data sets and tutorials. They're so sweet and cute and everything works. Data sets in the wild. Oh man, different story. So there's an element of truth to this. It certainly reflects lots of people's feelings about finding data sets in the wild. I know that. What I also want to emphasize is creating a good data set that is so carefully curated that it looks like that gorgeous puppy on the left, is a lot of work. And we, and by we, I mean digital humanists, I mean professional industry data wranglers, I mean tech people, we are all terrible at estimating how much work it'll take to actually make a data set that is as neat and as beautiful and as usable as that photo on the left. Okay, so pausing there for a second, let's actually look at the results from the poll. And I'm just going to refresh them. I think, okay. So it looks, are you all seeing this just to check? Yes, excellent. So it looks like some people have not looked for data sets before. Some people have looked, couldn't find anything. A lot of people found data that was sort of what they needed. And some people, wow, found exactly the right data that they needed. That's great. I'm delighted to hear it. So moving on, tell me, and this is where I'd like you to just throw your answers into the chats. Where have you looked for data before? Just throw in the name of the website. Census Bureau, MLA, Glasstire, HathiTrust, ICPSR, yeah, Washington State Digital Archives, data.gov, Statista, yeah. So you are all helping to prove one of the points that I want to make really strongly, which is that there is no secret treasure map to the one location that has all the data sets that you have not gained access to. If there were one secret treasure map, I would give it to you. I would tell you to spread it far and wide. But in fact, lots of people from academia, from the tech industry, hobbyists, from social services, all of them are creating data and sharing that data and using different systems and techniques to find and store it. And so there is, unfortunately, right now, if you want to find data, there are a lot of places that you need to look. Maybe that's unfortunate in some ways. In other ways, I think that it shows that we are an evolving community, and there are lots of different places we can look for different types of data. second and third points, I'm not going to hammer on too much here, but I want to plant them as seeds in your mind right now, early on. One is that data can represent a lot of things. It might be the data that is created and used might be a truth in some way. It is never the truth, no matter how much institutions or organizations tell us, oh, well, the data says, so we're going to do this. It's only ever, at best, a facet of a much larger and more complex truth. And thirdly, this is a key thing for figuring out whether the data you find will work for you. You can only ask questions that you've prepared your data to answer. Okay, moving on. Another question to tell us in the chat. I'm really curious, why are you looking for data? Is it for your research? Is it for your job? Is it because you are really, really into My Little Pony and you're tracking all the My Little Ponies that have ever existed? I have a good friend who would consider this very worthwhile. Research and teaching. School to get a job in data. Personal, okay. A lot of research. Okay. Library patrons. Awesome, thank you. Okay, this is all good. It helps me confirm that I'm going in the right direction. So in addition to those particular purposes, I want to highlight a couple other reasons that it can be really useful to look for data. That first bullet point, using it for analysis, is something that probably is implicit in looking at research, but there are a few other points. One, you might want to specifically be looking at data in order to see what its structure is because you want to emulate that structure. And for this, I want to show you one example. It is the Black short story data set created by Kenton Ramsby, Jade Harrison, and Rebecca Newsom in 2018. It's a really neat data set. Let's get into a quick look at it. So 100 anthologies and Black short stories. I've just put it into my own Google Drive. Here, you can download it at the link in the slides. So we've got the anthology publication date, the anthology type, title, the source title, the source genre, the original publication date, decade, author, birth year. And if you are creating a data set about short stories, then sometimes it's easier, rather than coming up and reinventing the wheel, to say, well, how did somebody else structure this data? And what categories did they use? And will those categories work for me? That can save you time and effort. And that's one great reason to look for data, to see how info about a particular topic has been structured. You might also want to see what data exists that you might already build on. For example, if you were thinking, oh, I need to create a data set of Black short stories, and you found this data set, then you could be like, well, thank goodness I saved myself months and months of typing into an Excel spreadsheet. Maybe I can just use this data set instead. And that's a really key, honestly, that is those, and there are some digital scholarship librarians in this workshop, I know, and they will tell you always look to see whether you can save yourself months and months of work only to discover that the data you wanted already existed. And finally, you might be learning a new tool or practicing a new programming skill, and oh, you might have an idea for a data set that you want to find that is near and dear to your heart. and it's the subject of your dissertation or your thesis, that data can feel really high stakes to work with. And if you can work with a data set that is, man, even silly, in order to learn a new tool or skill and focus on learning that tool or skill rather than thinking about what does this tool say about this data that I love, then that can be really, really helpful. One of the data sets I like to work with is all about avocado prices, because I, too, like so many of you, love avocado toast, which is destroying, which means that I will never be able to own a house. The avocado toast data set, and I can bring it up for anyone who's looking for it, is a great data set for just testing out a tool and seeing, hey, how does this work? Is it working? So you can find a good data set that's just for practicing with stuff on. Okay, so there are some really big overarching questions that you want to ask about data you find. And then we're going to get into some little questions as well, more precise questions. You really want to find out, who was involved in this? Was it one person, 2 people, 10 people, 100 people? Because that might tell you a lot more about the condition of the data set and how organized it was. Just like the more people are involved in organizing something or creating something, the more communication has to take place, the more work it is, the more people who are involved in creating a data set, the more potential there might be confusion or errors in the data set. You really want to find out, when possible, why people made this data. Were they making it for a research project? Were they making it because they hoped to monetize it in some way? Were they doing it for a class project or to practice a new skill or to show off their programming skills so that they could get a new job, which is a thing that lots of programmers and software developers do? You really want to find out, how invested were they in this data? And you really want to know, how careful were they to document their process? I ask this third question because there are an awful lot of decisions that go into creating data or a data set, and often you really only figure out those questions and how to answer them over time. It's entirely likely that people who start out making a data set, even if they have they think they have a really clear idea of how they're going to do it, that halfway through, as they make that data set, they'll have realized, oh gosh, this is more complex. Maybe I need to think about it a different way. And they might think, oh yeah, now that I've realized that, I can go back and change the beginning of the data set later and neaten it all up. I'll remember that. Spoiler, they won't remember that. You won't remember that either if you're making data sets. So did you take careful notes as you were making it? Did someone take careful notes as they were making the data set, and did they share those? Unfortunately though, it won't always be clear what the origins of a data set are. And only some of the time will the creators explain why they made it, and they're even less likely to say, oh, by the way, this is actually the crappy rough draft version of my data set, just so you know. And yes, I am here to tell you that data sets, just like essays, have crappy first drafts. Sometimes they have crappy 5th drafts or 7th drafts or 10th drafts too. With that said, there are a few concepts that you can learn in order to help you see or read, if you prefer, a data set or data you find on the internet more clearly. Those are really important because when you find data, we really want you to be able to say more than just, I found some data. So let's get into those. Some of you may already know a few of these. Don't worry, we're going to get into more complex topics soon. All right, so I'm not going to dwell too much on these 3 vocab terms because I'm going to actually show you some examples of them in the next slides. But they're here, and you've got the slides that you can download, so you'll have them. So machine readable data versus non-machine readable data. Any of us might look at these two images and say, well, these are basically the same thing. They're the first page of Charlotte Bronte's novel, Jane Eyre. But for a computer, the image on the left-hand side, the JPEG photo, is just that, a photo. On the right-hand side, that text file that includes words. And we could ask a computer program to count how many times the word and occurs, or I, or we. Computers are much faster processors of information than you are, but you are much more sophisticated processors of information than a computer. So often, well, all sorts of things could be data. This printed book, this is data, according to me. According to my computer, it's just a load of paper. And some of the time, the work that you might need to do, and if you hear me acknowledging that often the data you find won't be there ready on the internet waiting for you, yes, I'm acknowledging that. You may need to do some work to make your data machine readable. Okay, moving on. So next, you might hear about structured data. And here we're going to go back to the Black short story data set from Ramsby, Newsom, and Harris. So we're just taking a closer look at it now because it's a good example of what it means to structure data and what doing so accomplishes. The image here doesn't include all the columns, but I've typed them below so that you can see them. Now, if this were unstructured data, it would probably look like a Word document. In fact, probably like a bibliography, since much of the data that's contained here is data that you'd find in a bibliography or a works cited page. But to illustrate the power of structured data, consider if you wanted to see how many short stories included the word black in the title. There are at least a few in this data set, I can tell you, because I've spent some time with it. Little Black Riding Hood, Long Black Song, Black Is as Black Does. But if you searched for black in that unstructured data bibliography, you'd probably keep on getting hits for the Wiley Blackwell anthology. And that's not what you're looking for at all. So structuring data means that we can look for black, but we can look only in column E, the source title. Now, it's important to note that Ramsby, Harrison, and Newsom's data set includes 15 columns, but even if you've only got 4 columns, that's still structured data. It doesn't have to be big in order to be valuable. It's what you want to ask of it that will determine how it needs to be structured. Now, let's talk about interoperability. So let's imagine that you wanted to make a data set for Latino or Latinx literature or indigenous literature, and you used the same columns that Ramsby, Harrison, and Newsom did, and you used the same descriptions they're using for things like genre. Then we could say that those two data sets are interoperable. They could be combined, put into analysis programs together. We would be able to ask questions of both data sets at the same time. Some people would say, this is exactly what we should do. We should make all data sets alike so that they can all work together and we can ask bigger questions. And I'll go ahead and say I think that in some cases, those columns and categories from Ramsby and Newsom, anthology type and title, could work pretty well. But, this is a big but, depending on the research questions you want to ask, there might be other information that you want to structure There might be other information. You might have a really good reason to structure that info differently. Someone is commenting in the chat, I see in passing, on the tendency of data structures to be really heteronormative. And oh my God, yes, that is entirely true. And it is challenging sometimes to push back against them because there is so much pressure on the way we have always done things. Interoperability can be important to strive for because it's part of the labor of collaboration. It's part of thinking about, instead of having 50 different data sets that are focused on Latinx topics, are there ways that we can make it easy to put some of them together in order to allow us to do more? But it's really important not to say, oh, well, interoperability is always the way to go. It's what we should always be striving for. Sometimes it's really, really not. But this is something to look at when you're looking for data sets to consider. You might find two different data sets that are sort of about the same topic. And you might think, man, could I put these together? How much work would I need to do making the columns and the categories line up? What would the effect of that be doing for the data? Okay, checking in briefly. I want to see, are there questions so far? Though I'm going to note that we've still got plenty of time to go, so I'm really trying not to get into massive theoretical debates, though we could certainly, there'll be time for that closer to the end.
There we go. I was going to say I don't see any yet, but someone just posted.
Has anyone created a finding aid for historical data sets? Oh man, Larry, there are, I have seen so many sort of versions of this, and indeed, Rupika Risam and others have been, there's an effort right now with Alex Hill to coordinate a list of Caribbean data sets and digital projects. There are so many different ones. Centralization is a challenge, and it is a rabbit hole, and we could talk to folks like Quinn Dombrowski about DH projects like Project Bamboo. I'm not going to get into that, but I don't think it's likely that there will be one simple location immediately. I will also say that the answer to part of that would be for all of y'all who are creating data sets, which I'm pretty sure is a lot of you, to think about where to put those data sets so that they will be findable, and we will get into that. Is there a suggested resource that we can use to refer back to these concepts? That's a really good question, and I want to note here something I haven't said so far today. I have been really careful in the vocab so far to use terms that are used throughout DH circles, but also in, frankly, tech industry circles. Because one of the challenge when you are figuring out how to do something is figuring out just what to call it. So you can find books about structured data, you can find discussions of interpretive layers, etc. And that's going to be true of, we haven't even gotten to interpretive layers, sorry, my bad. You're going to be able to look at the vocabulary, look up the concepts that I've given you, and find references to them all over the internet. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Just a couple more terms, and then we're actually going to get into some of the places where you can find data. Okay, so two more things. Controlled vocabularies. So you have seen controlled vocabularies before. One of the most common places they're used is in gathering demographic data, asking about your age and your ethnicity. Now, controlled vocabularies focusing on ethnicity are known for not being very inclusive. Let me rephrase that. They're known for not being inclusive at all in a lot of cases. Frequently, the organizations and institutions who work with data try to make controlled vocabularies as small as possible, because the smaller they are, the easier they are to manage. Sometimes you'll hear about the concept of normalizing data, and normalizing refers to the process of making data conform to a controlled vocabulary or other standard. I want to be really, really clear. This often flattens people's identities in a way that I think is really harmful. It also implies that data that hasn't been normalized is abnormal in some way, and that just others people. It's a huge problem. And I'm going to give you one technique that I think can potentially help with it, but it's a challenge, and I don't want to back away from that. And those of you who make data sets may find at some point that people push back if you're using a controlled vocabulary. And it is important to not try and deny them, deny their critique. It is important to face up to it and listen. I will say that there are occasions where some normalization really can be helpful. So data often needs to be normalized, frequently dates, for example, because we have so many ways of writing them. Looking at this first date, you might think that it referred to January 8th, 1987, until you looked at the second date and then are like, man, does this actually refer to August 1st? Messy dates can lead to inaccurate calculations or computers having errors when they read them because they think it's not a date, it's a subtraction problem. And they're even harder for humans to read. I recommend the standard ISO 8601, which is an internationally used way of formatting dates. So dates, yeah, they definitely need normalization. I'm going to show you a couple of other instances where I would say that a controlled vocabulary can actually be beneficial, can come in handy. So 2 data set examples. One of them's very, very silly. The other one is more serious. The first one is a data set. I hope that there are some sci-fi fans out here who are fans of the show Doctor Who, long running on British TV since the 60s. So this data set was created a couple of years ago by a couple of reporters at The Guardian, or at least they were the ones who introduced the story that introduced it. Though I would not be surprised if more people were working on it. So we're going to look at column H. I'm going to even just zoom in on this a little bit more, which asks you to consider the motivation of the villains, what they wanted from that episode. If we start looking at it, see Earth invasion / human extermination, Earth invasion / human extermination, universal control, Earth invasion, human extermination, war, world domination, absorb planets, world domination, Earth invasion, human extermination, serve big bad, world domination, wants evil. So let me ask you, how many of you know the difference between serve big bad and world domination? Is there a significant difference? How about a significant difference between serve big bad and wants evil? Or human extermination versus kill Doctor and companions versus defeat the Doctor? Serve big bad, wants immortality. Obey bureaucracy. This is one of my favorites. I'm going to go ahead and say that this is it would be hard to ask any questions of this particular column of a data set, because we would have to say, are we looking for everything that mentions evil? Should we be looking for evil or bad? This is one case where it would actually be helpful if the creators wanted this data set to be something that we could analyze. If they thought about, well, what are the different motivations? Then they could ask a research question about the different motivations of villains in Doctor Who. This is a data set that's clearly been created by hobbyists, but there's certainly been academic scholarship done about pop culture shows like Doctor Who. They reflect all sorts of interesting cultural norms and biases. And unfortunately, if anyone were going to use this data set for research, they would need to do a lot of work to clean up that column. So back to the slides briefly. This other data set that I'm going to show you briefly was created by the Committee to Protect Journalists. And it's a data set that has not been shared. Anyone? Hopefully you can be able to view that if you want to. So this is a data set of journalists killed in action since 1992. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but if we look over at the column N, type of death, you might notice that it says dangerous assignment, murder, crossfire, combat related. Here, and if you look at this column, it's very consistent. There are only 3 types of death here. So they are using a controlled vocabulary. And let's see, if you look, we're going to skip to this, there's a link on the slide. CPJ included a methodology page about their data set, and they actually explain how they're categorizing deaths and what that means. So in this case, a data set could be incredibly graphic, and that would make it even harder to work with, though there's always that tension between representing and being able to ask questions about it. They're using a controlled vocabulary that helps them ask certain questions about the way that journalists encountered fatal violence. And they're making it easier for folks who are trying to look into this to start understanding what is happening, what are journalists facing. So this is an example where the data set is meant as a starting point, and it does allow people to see, are there certain cases certain categories that should be looked into. The data set is only a representation of part of what happened. It can't cover everything. It's just a placeholder and a starting point. Okay, so those are two examples, one where a controlled vocabulary is being used, and I think effectively, another where a controlled vocabulary could be needed. Finally, one more piece of vocabulary, an interpretive layer. Now, as the slide says, an interpretive layer is a classification system that groups items together to make them more easily discoverable. You've experienced interpretive layers before, I'm pretty sure, because I'm betting that nearly all of you have ordered pizza. And you've probably all been asked about meat toppings, cheese toppings, and veggie toppings. Those section headings that said meat, cheese, and veggie, those are your interpretive layer. In a data set that's contained in a spreadsheet, adding an interpretive layer is just about putting in another column. There's a really good example of this in the Ramsby, Harrison, and Newsom Black Short Stories data set. Let's go back to that for a second. So in this data set, there's a column for the publication year of the anthology. And there's a column for the author's birth year. But what if you wanted to see all the anthologies from the 1930s or the 70s, or all the authors who had been born in the 1900s? The decade columns, columns H and K, make it much simpler for someone to isolate that information. That's how an interpretive layer can work. It allows you to keep the preciseness of a data set, but also to filter it in and facet it in different ways. So a few questions that you should be asking yourself when you find a data set that you think might have a controlled vocabulary. One, you could say, is this vocab controlled? In that Doctor Who data set, I would have thought from the first few, oh yeah, they're using consistent names. As you go down the rows, you find like, whoa, no, they're putting all sorts of stuff in. You should also ask, where do the terms in the vocabulary or the interpretive layer come from? Are they based on and responsive to the communities or whoever's being represented? Are they someone else's concept of that community? Here again, we get into questions of Western versus non-Western representation, straight and heteronormative versus queer representation. Where did they come from? And what's possible with a controlled vocabulary or interpretive layer? What would be possible without one? What if, in the census, we included the controlled vocabularies that are there, but also allowed people to include their own representation and their own statement of their ethnicity, and allowed that to be represented as well? And instead of using the controlled vocabulary as the only way to be recognized, we allowed that to act in some ways as an interpretive layer, but allowed them to keep and record their own statement of their identity. Okay. Things you should also be aware of. Some data sets include READMEs, which are just little short text files that contain info about the data set and the creators. Sometimes they'll tell you why they created it, how they created it. Alas, often READMEs are kind of crappy and incomplete, but it's always good to look for them. You can find out sometimes whether a data set is still being added to or updated, or whether it's just been years. And it's also worth looking for to figure out what kind of formats data that you're finding is in. Is it open or proprietary? I say this because some formats are proprietary, like XLSX and DocX. You work with those in Microsoft tools. Some tools won't work with those. Some tools you really need open formats, like CSV. That's a very standard spreadsheet, or plain text. There are other formats too, open and closed, but it's really hard to go wrong with CSVs and TXT files. Many tools and platforms that you might want to work on for digital humanities projects will be able to handle those. Okay, so now I've given you a bunch of concepts to think about in terms of what you're seeing when you find a data set. Let's actually talk about places that you can look. So I have put several up here. I will note that I know that people are coming from all sorts of institutions. Different institutions have different subscriptions to databases, etc. So I have not included sources that might be paywalled in this data set. Though there are plenty of them that I think, based on ways that people answered the chat, they have access to. I'd just rather today focus on the open ones. And you're welcome. No, I think we don't do nearly enough to acknowledge the access issues for folks who are at wealthy institutions versus not. So a few of these. I'm not going to go through every single one of these just because there's limited amounts of time, and because a lot of them have relatively good user interfaces. And I'd rather, in some ways, focus mainly on techniques, but we're going to do a quick dip into some of them. One, so this is in part in response to Larry's question earlier about a LibGuide or finding aid for historical data sets. That does not exist, but the best place for something that would be even better than that would be if lots of people started making data sets and put them into the MLA core repository, where you can put all sorts of things. You can put conference presentations, open access articles, etc. But you can also put in data sets. We're going to go to find open access materials. And then over on the right-hand side, we can browse by item type. And if we click on the more, and click more again, we can get to data set and start finding deposits that people have made. Core is branching out a little bit recently, so it says all deposits, which includes all sorts of things. I'm truthfully not sure where those are coming from because I don't think that MLA people are creating data sets about Tesla deaths. But if we look at MLA deposits, we'll find data sets that other people have deposited. So MLA Core is an open access repository for humanities material. You don't have to be an MLA member to deposit to it. Anyone can join. If there were one place that were going to be a natural place for data sets for the humanities to be stored and preserved and found, this would be it. This is a great place. And no worries for people who have to run. And it is not too hard to get there. And of course, you can search by keywords for topics as well. Coming back. So I'm going to touch on, of these repositories, you've actually seen Dataverse because it's where the Ramsby dataset is, but we're going to go to Figshare briefly. Here too, you can search for all sorts of things. You can search for digital humanities for that matter. I'm actually going to pull up one of my favorite data sets just by searching for cartoonists. And this is a good example of being able to search for keywords. Here too, you can filter by item type. This is the Cartoonists of Color data set. I want to highlight it in part because it has a really great example of providing all the information you need to understand this data set, including the choice that the creators made in order to not normalize and certainly not over-normalize data that's in there in order to give that right back to the people to keep their data as unique and as reflective of their own sense of their identities. Okay. All right. We're not going to, the Google dataset search is just Google, but it's for data sets. Jeremy Singer-Vine's Data is Plural is a newsletter. So if you want data delivered to your inbox, that's a good place to work. I will also highlight the fact that Data is Plural is a newsletter that will tend to send you data sets that are a lot closer to looking like that neatly groomed puppy. So if you're looking for data sets that are more polished, that's a good way to get them. I want to highlight a couple of data sets that are, or techniques for finding data that are less well known. One is looking, frankly, on Twitter, because lots of people from all sorts of different contexts will, when they make a data set, decide that they're going to talk about it. And so you can put in keywords, plus dataset, or optionally put in just a phrase like, I made a dataset, and see what comes up. You're going to get, you may find some scruffy puppies in here. You may also find things that you didn't know existed. One of my favorite data sets that I've found is about Sephora reviews that mention crying in the products. And I clicked through to this, and it's made as a sort of a slick user interface. You can't actually get to the data from here. You have to do a little bit of research to get to the creator's website, but eventually you can find, I'm moving fast on this, you can find how to get to the data on GitHub where you can download it. But the point is that I would never have known that a data set about Sephora reviews that contained crying existed had I started looking in just very traditional sources. So you never know what you're going to find on Twitter, but it can be an incredible place to look. All right. I also, this is my favorite technique. I learned about it from Alberto Cairo, who is a wonderful scholar of data visualization. It's called the Google file type operator search. So just going to open a new tab. Well, first I'll highlight that what you're doing when you use Google and search with file type operators is you're telling Google, I want search results for this keyword, but I only want search results that are in the format of this, such as CSV, comma separated values, or PDF or text or whatever. You can do this with lots of different file types. So I'm going to type in colonial. Lots of people are interested in post-colonial studies. And file type CSV, and see what comes up. You'll notice if you look at these hits that right away you can see everything is, this is only getting you data that comes in the format of tables that are actually in CSVs. So if we could look at these, and a couple of them, the first two seem to be in GitHub. Colonial Politics, a collection of transcriptions from British newspapers alongside originals from colonial and American newspapers. Well, that sounds like it might be relevant, but we don't know much more about this. What are the contexts in which this was made? We look at the GitHub page, and if you're new to GitHub, many of you might be, you may be unused to this, but you can get used to it and start to notice that every repository in GitHub has a user. In this case, the user is MH Beals. And if we hover over, we can see MH Beals. She's a lecturer in digital history in Loughborough in the UK. Well, that's a pretty decent sign that she is not just, that she's there's a good possibility she's making this for digital humanities projects, which means that there's a good possibility that she's being careful about it in ways that all of you might need someone to be careful. And there's a good chance that she will actually provide information about her data. We can click on this and try and learn more about the project. Look, she's even got a README, collection of transcriptions, tells you who was compiled, who contributed. That's a really great sign. We're going to jump back to our results, and let's look at this other one, Indigenous Colonial Court Cases, 1788 to 1838. That sounds like it might have potential. Again, we're going to glance at these. And if we, let's see, can I when you're screen sharing, it's hard. Ah, there we go. I can scroll across and start to see what's here. What's here? Eventually we get to stuff that makes me think, page number, bundle number, real number, item number, this might be from some archive. And if we click on hover over the user, Tim Sherritt, we don't know who that is, but if we go to the project, we start to see New South Wales State Archives online indexes. So right away, we found a couple of data sets that we could theoretically start playing with just with keywords. It's worth noting, what if we searched for colonial data sets without the file type operators? And here, again, we've gotten some hits that look like they might be really good. Colonial dates data set, colonial history data set, imperial and colonial history data sets. The point I want to make here is that we're getting really different stuff by searching just by keywords and searching with file type operators. In doing so, there's no one search technique to look for. They really all are potentially going to be useful, and you're going to find different stuff depending on what technique you use. Okay, so having introduced you to some of those techniques, I'll take questions if people have them, but I'd really like to invite all of you to take a couple minutes and experiment with one or more of those techniques or one or more of those sites and keywords for your fields to see what you find. And if you find something interesting, feel free to just drop it in the chat. Say, I found this data set, etc. So I'm going to set my timer just for 90 seconds too, which is longer than people ever think it is.
I think the links are in the chat, right, Lore? So if people are looking for them to access the sites.
Yes, I posted them all individually, and then you can also access them through the presentation, which I'll put that on there as well in a second.
Yeah. Yes, you can use two keywords, absolutely. So you could use like theater and gender and CSV. How would you search for a geoplace and keyword? So that might be if you were looking for, let's see, colonial Spain. It's always a question of what you would actually find in this regard. We've gotten several data sets for colonial Spain, slave trade data, port info, CSV. To me, that sounds like it might have potential influences of Native American land use on the colonial Euro. It is, I don't know what you'll find, not having done all these keyword searches. This just helps you surface particular stuff. Let's see. Oh, okay. Theater with gender work as well to further limit. Yes, yes. So if we do theater, and some of us might spell theater with an RE, so you might try it both ways. let's do txt just. So here we're getting some plain text, though that's getting us, and lots of things are in plain text. I'm going to go back to CSV. But sometimes you may not find that, sometimes you may just need to go back to one or the other. Let's see, looking for Hispanic in Harvard Dataverse. Let's see, trans-oral history. Well, it looks to me like I'm finding more with theater spelled with an R-E in here, potentially. Three. Treader Transgender Oral History Project, okay. Oh, this is a data set that I didn't know about. So just as an example, so if you use keyword quotation marks around the keywords, then that will limit you, just as when you use quotation marks around a phrase in Google, it will search only for that phrase. So if you had searched for transgender oral history or trans oral history in quotes, you might have gotten to this. When you're searching for data sets, I would say that often using quotes is more likely to limit you too much rather than help you filter in, unless there are already a lot of data sets that already exist. And for a lot of theater plus gender, the plus sign is great. That one's fine. That looks for both of those. There's not really any difference between using theater plus gender or just doing, I don't think there is. Let's see. Yeah, we're getting the same ones. So whereas if we typed that in quotes, theater, well, we might still find some things that are different. You never know what you're going to find. So, okay. Can you delimit and block ads? Alas, no, you can't. Not that I know of. You might be able to use, you could do this in DuckDuckGo, which already blocks ads and is a lot less evil than Google. Although with DuckDuckGo, they let you use file type operators, but they won't let you search for CSVs. They'll only let you search for XLS. So it gets a little bit tricky, a little bit detailed. Yeah, and Linda points out that you find a number of publications text files. You never know what you're going to find. I will say that searching by file type like this is in itself a decent way of blocking out ads and stuff, because in a lot of places, ads aren't making those files available for download. Yeah, I know. I only discovered that this morning, and I was so surprised. I want to write them and say, like, what are you doing, DuckDuckGo? You are so good. Why? Okay. So coming back to this, anyone else want to highlight data or data sets that they're finding and that they want to talk about? See, what do we have here? Three, two, one. Okay, so let's move on.
Sorry,
Yep.
looks like somebody, Eva, did you already ask your question? I saw that your hand was raised.
Ah,
yes.
Eva, please go ahead.
Hi, I just had a quick question. When we download, different types of data sets and files, do you have any ideas or recommendations for like not downloading like viruses or just being or like thoughts about that?
So I think one of the reasons that I recommend searching in this way is that you're able to see the file type that you are downloading. But I always also recommend that you do look and see where it is. Lots and lots of sites, including GitHub, have some degree of protection so that when people upload files to them, the files are scanned for viruses. That is not true of every site. I also don't recommend downloading a file type that is not a CSV if you're looking for CSV. If you're looking for a CSV and you see an exe file, don't download that. Happily, I would say that scammers and folks who are trying to spread malware through the internet are less likely to try and say, here's a free data set and you can and you're going to get malware than they are to say, here's how you can watch a free version of Marvel's Black Panther. Click on this link to do it. So this is lower risk, but nowhere on the internet is no risk. So look and see, what kind of site are you downloading this from? Does it seem like a site that is actually belongs to an organization as opposed to a random person on the internet? Look and see what kind of file type you're downloading, and if you click on it and your computer sends you a preview and the file type is not what you thought you were downloading, don't download that data set. I'm glad that's helpful. And I did see that Shibundo had found, a small one on sex work legislative models by country. Okay. Really interesting. And it's an Excel. Oh, there's the preview. Sorry, I was looking for the content. So when you're finding these two, we were talking about interoperability and about not reinventing the wheel. It can be so much more useful to look at an existing data set and see how are they structuring this. Maybe you say, oh yeah, I can structure my data the same way. But maybe you look at it and you immediately think, man, they left out this thing. A good data set, a better data set would include this column, would represent this aspect of it. Right. Let's see. Figshare. And somebody found a data set that was under embargo. That just means that the data set has not been released to the public yet. Sometimes there are a variety of reasons that the data set might not be released. The most common one is that the data set is part of some paywalled publication and it can only be released 12, 24, 36 months after the original publication. So at some point, you would be able to access it. In most cases, when something's under embargo, you might find that you can contact the creators directly and you have to ask them for it, but then they'll send it to you. They just can't make it widely available and openly available. Okay. And Larry found one about colonial South Carolina. Oh, excellent. I'm glad that was useful. Okay, so coming back to this, and I'm checking the time. So this showed up in our survey as well earlier. Lots of people had just not found data that was sort of what they needed. Frankly, it's alas, where we are in digital humanities, we are so much further than we were 10 years ago, when I don't think that we would have found any data sets using file type operators that were relevant to digital humanities. Now we found several. So we've come a long way, but we have an awfully long way to go. And so I'm delighted that some of you were able to find the perfect data set, the way that more of you will be able to find a data set that is closer to perfect for what you need will be if we share our own data sets as we create them, if we release them through repositories like MLA Core or Figshare or Zenodo. And if we license them, now I'm not going to get into licensing today. Licensing doesn't mean giving up your copyright. It just means giving people explicit permission to use your data set and to modify it and adapt it. And that will make it so that if I am lucky to be teaching this workshop again 10 years from now, it might be, the answers to that survey might be really, really different. So I want to come back to this, to a key point from my earlier 3 assertions. Data really is limited, and there have been comments flying by in the chat that I'm not sure, I think I haven't even had a chance to respond to. I think all of you could identify ways in which data tends to flatten our identities, flatten our realities, flatten data that should be discovered, that needs to be discovered, and that does, because we have no data, we don't acknowledge that conditions exist. That said, trying to represent complexity in the space of an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV spreadsheet column can be really challenging. If you have a data set of 5,000 rows and you're trying to see into it, sometimes you run into the problem where if you're trying to process it as a human, you can't. You just see there's a lot of information here. So thinking about representation, I would say that as a whole, we can do better and spend more time thinking critically about how to represent people equitably and justly and fairly in data sets. It's tricky, but it can be done. So here are 3 questions for thinking about this. One is, what is the root source or sources that you're working with? And who does that root source represent? Is it white-based, or does it actually originate with people of color, communities of color? Is it representing them fairly? Another question to consider is, who are you creating this data for? Are you creating it just for your research? And that's a question that sometimes folks who are more privileged need to consider. If they're creating this data just for their research, is there a way that they could make it representative? Is there a way that they could create it for the communities who are involved? And what precisely are you attempting to represent? So here, I'm going to give you one more example for this. This is a short case study of a project that I'm working on an ongoing basis. It's based on a radio show called Desert Island Discs. It's been running in the BBC since 1942. It features guests each week who come onto the show and are interviewed, and they choose 7 favorite records, songs. They choose 1 record that is their favorite song, and they choose 1 book and 1 luxury item. The data for most shows is available on the internet at pages that show you, just give you the information. And approximately 7 years out of 7 decades was gathered via web scraping about 10 years ago now. So data looks a lot like this. I'm showing it to you in OpenRefine, which is a data cleaning and exploration tool. You see we've got the guest, their gender, their role, different items, their selection, composer, performers, etc. Coming back to this, and I've got a link to the data for those of you who want to poke at it. It's also an MLA core. Something that I had to ask was, what was I trying to represent when I was creating data about guests' roles? If I look at the data, I've got Jane Goodall, primatologist, writer, Neil Jordan, filmmaker and writer. You may have noticed on a previous slide that jazz trumpeter Louis Armstrong was included. There are lots of people who've been included on this show, and rarely does one word encompass all of anyone's identity. And I had to think a lot, how do I be inclusive? And I struggled because in trying to be inclusive to represent the people who had been on this show, I found that my data set got so complex and I tried to be so representative of people's real life that it wouldn't work with any platform, and it would have taken more time than I could have had to maintain it unless I had had a trust fund and was independently wealthy and could focus on just this. What I ended up deciding was that what I could represent was precisely the way that the BBC saw these people. The BBC saw them as an actress or as an actor, as a writer. That tells me something about the cultural history of this radio program. I'm not trying to make it entirely true to someone's entire identity. A data set in the end is just a data set. It's just one piece. It's not all of who they are. It's still worth considering what questions would I want to ask, and what questions can I ask and can I not ask? One of the questions I wanted to ask was about gender equality. My data set is from the years 2000 through 2009. Supposedly that's a pretty progressive time for the BBC, supposedly. So I thought, man, if I could track gender, would there be gender parity? So the original data set didn't include a column for gender. So I ended up spending one summer watching Grey's Anatomy and going through and adding a gender dimension. I say this to emphasize that sometimes it's worth putting labor into gender. And that let me actually investigate whether the BBC had gender parity in their guests for the show during this 10 years. I want to emphasize too that male and female are only 2 genders. There are more inclusive terms, but at the time when I created this and at the time that it represented, the BBC was not using terms like non-binary. So it's limited, but I still got a sense of where it was. So I won't ask you whether or not you think that the BBC had hit gender parity during this time. Well, actually, maybe I will. If you think that, I can see some of you, if you think the BBC had hit gender parity in this decade, raise your hand or stick it in the chat. No, no, no. Good guess. We're gonna just look at this and I'll interpret it for you. So during this decade, male guests outnumbered female guests 3-1. So, I'm going to, yeah, no surprise at all. This is a data set that I highlight just briefly because it's a data set that I keep on thinking about because I think, man, it would be really useful if I included an interpretive layer that would let me include genre for music or genre for books. It would be interesting if I were to, I can't ask questions currently about the BBC's inclusivity about race and ethnicity. If I wanted to do that, I would almost certainly have to put in some sort of controlled vocabulary around race in order to ask that question. So this is where it gets really, really tricky, where you do end up normalizing in some way or facing the question of whether to normalize. We are almost done because we really are at close to time, and I do want there to be time for some Q&A. But
we have a question in the chat.
yeah, oh, I'd missed it.
So Cora asks, what is web scraping?
What is web scraping? Oh, okay, so web scraping is when you program a script to go along to a web page and pull certain information off of it. It's much faster than going to that web page and copying and pasting it yourself. It can get you a lot of information really fast. Unfortunately, lots of companies don't like you web scraping. Lots of companies would like to make it illegal. In fact, there's a case in the Supreme Court right now, briefly putting on my copyright librarian hat to mention that. In some cases, web scraping can just be tricky to do because of the way that websites are structured. However, there are folks who have been doing wonderful work around web scraping, and the best project that discusses that is the Datasitters Club. For those of you who read the Babysitters Club workbooks, I'm going to just grab So there are a whole bunch of, there are discussions about web scraping here and the messiness of it. There are also discussions about copyright. It is also just the coolest project in DH, or one of the coolest. There are lots of ones. So worth keeping an eye, worth digging into there. Can anyone web scrape? Yes, anyone can web scrape. It's something that you learn just like you might learn Java or Python or programming with R. I'm not terribly good at it, I will admit. So there are some good tutorials on the Datasitters Club site. Okay, coming back, I'm going to just
We had
jump.
another question that was.
Oh, sure, please, go ahead.
This is from Gabriela, and she asks, is that what Google does when it crawls the web?
So almost certainly yes. The other answer to that is sort of, I don't know, because Google is terribly not open about what they are doing when they crawl the web. Another important distinction is that web scraping, the way that we're thinking of it, is meant to grab only certain stuff. Like on this slide, you're seeing pictures, you're seeing the phrase home service, you're seeing actress Nova Pilbeam, you're seeing 2045. When we web scrape, we want to be able to tell the web, get me the name, get me the role, and get me the date. We're saying, get me only this information, don't get me this other information. So when Google crawls the web, it's generally looking for everything. Sure thing. All right, I am going to wrap this up. So coming back to this, I hope that these 3 assertions that we started with have been made a little bit more concrete in the process of the last hour and a bit. And I think that they have implications for the projects that you want to develop. And the big question to end on is really, what are you going to do with your data set once you've created and modified it? I really hope that although you could just keep it on your computer, that at some point you will, because you're moving on to other exciting projects, deposit it somewhere first. Stick it in MLA Core, stick it in Figshare, so that other people can build on it, change it, develop it even further, and you will be part of supporting other people's work. So with that said, time for questions. Oh, I'm so glad that this was useful to people. Oh, Gabby, you're mute. Oops.
Hello? I'm still muted.
No, we hear you. We hear you.
All right. Let's see if we have any questions here. Oh, Linda, do you want to ask your question?
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple of questions here. We have one from Linda and we have one from Richard Chavran.
On entry points, you know, Linda asks a great question, and I would say one thing that I do is in some ways just what we did here. Looking at a whole spreadsheet, especially a big spreadsheet, can be overwhelming. So start with one column and be like, what do we see here? What is this column meant to mean? Those of you who work with literature or history, who work with genre at all, genres are also a key area where controlled vocabularies are often used, whether or not they're being used in the context of data or printed work, and say, where does the stuff in this spreadsheet come from? Mm-hmm. What are the assumptions that it's making? I would also say it's always interesting to ask students questions like, if there's one more piece of information that you could use, that you could add to this data set, if we could pretend that it wouldn't take so much work to do, what would that be? Why? What could we do if this data set included another piece of information? Mm-hmm. Let's see. And Richard notes that sometimes downloading CSV files, sometimes Excel will strip out certain characters. So yeah, you might want to use LibreOffice. Unfortunately, also, computing technology is absolutely awful at dealing with special characters in most cases. I have, though, man, we could do another mini workshop on UTF and coding and getting into sort of the guts of a file to see whether you can fix it so that it actually, because it is possible to make files show accents correctly. It just takes some fiddling that we don't always teach people how to do. Now, what do I do with this data? Yes, I would love to teach that workshop. I might teach it whether or not I teach it through this program or outside of it. But I will also be here. I'm gonna, yes, stop sharing. Thank you for stopping sharing the screen. I will be giving that talk in January, and that will also deal with data and what you do with it. The link for part 2 does not exist yet, but we got the YouTube channel.
So we'll be sharing all that information on our social media pages, and then we can also add you to our newsletter, so we can, our listserv, so we can automatically send you information. So I see a couple of people have asked to be put on that, and we can definitely do that. Yes, so if you can go ahead and send me a private message. I mean, we have all your email addresses, but you know, send me an email or send me it in the private chat and I will write you down.
Good. Are there any other questions for Dr. Morgan or for the USLDH team? Oh yeah, Mariana, go ahead.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Maybe this is out of line because I am new to the whole digital humanities thing, but I was wondering what would be the first step if I would like to I don't know, teach a little bit about this to my students. Like, I feel this is very abstract, and it's very much for us that we're really we know about research, but what would be the first step for young students, and is it necessary, or I don't know. Yes.
Man, that is a really interesting question, and other people on this call might have ideas too. I will say in the past, I would also say that there are a couple of things at stake here. Throughout this workshop, I've been moving back and forth between looking at data and thinking about the politics of data. And that felt appropriate given this venue, given these audiences, given all sorts of reasons. But sometimes if you're introducing younger students, they might not be ready for both of those at once. And so I think it's fine to do this in 2 steps to get them thinking about just what is data and what can it show us, and then to start thinking about the political significance of that. Doing that is still work and still tricky. I did a talk a few years ago for a group of junior high and high school students, and for that talk, I ended up doing text analysis of Harry Potter. And I can throw that link in the chat in case it's useful. Although that was a few years ago, and I think that now there are lots of good reasons for not reading Harry Potter. I would, well, and there are lots of, we can all acknowledge that we like problematic things too. But the thing that I realized, I was really happy. I was like, so did y'all read Harry Potter? They're like, yeah, we know it, but also what about Percy Jackson? Have you done this on the Percy Jackson books? So thinking about, is there data that is relevant to your students that's going to connect with them? Maybe that's data about Marvel. Maybe that's a data set about Phineas and Ferb, for those of you who have kids who like Phineas and Ferb. Maybe it's data about Sesame Street or kittens. There's so much stuff. And let's see. And Lynn has, right. Oh man, that's a really cool idea. So Lynn uses data set that looks like the dog on the right, the scruffy dog, and then walking them through a process of adding interpretive layers and what else they would like to have, and using teen pregnancy data for Texas. Get at them. Yes, that's really excellent advice. Yes, song lyrics are awesome, and there are lots of song lyrics data sets out there, and song genre data sets, and people have strong opinions about genre. So that would be a really neat way to connect people to that. I'm sure there are TikTok-related data sets too. Oh my gosh, we could have so much fun.
Wonderful. So, well, thank you so much, Paige, for this wonderful workshop. We are very lucky to have had the chance to have shared this afternoon with you, with all the knowledge that you've given us. We ask you to please hold a space for Dr. Morgan's public talk on January, in January, and we'll drop the date on the chat in a little bit. We'll be posting it again, doing launching a promotion so that people can attend. It's going to be January 25th from 2 to 3 p.m. We invite you again to follow us on social media, to please visit our webpage, www.artepublicopress.com. Arte Publico Press is a nonprofit publishing house who has been publishing books for and by Latinos over the past 40 years. It is also the house of the recovery program. We do all the books that we publish. Everything that we do is nonprofit. So the more books that we get to sell, the more books that we get to produce, the more programming such as this that we get to do. So please, we invite you that now during this season, please, if you're going to give gifts to anybody, always the sharing books with children and adults is a wonderful way to stay connected. Also on our website, you will find more information about recovery and the databases that we have through EBSCO and Newsbank that include a lot of the information from the recovery program. Lastly, I should mention we've shared in the chat that Dr. Morgan is providing consultancy on 3 data sets that we will be releasing on materials from the recovery program. So we're very excited about that right now. She's working with the team in correcting them and making them as clean as possible for everybody. And so with that, I should acknowledge again my fabulous team, colleagues, Dr. Gautero, Lore, Dr. Linda Garcia Merchant, the coolest and bestest Carolina Villarroel, El Profe, Nicolas Canelos, who's been a visionary and who's always, we stand on his shoulders. Our colleagues, our undergraduate students, Catherine, who is somewhere in here following up, listening and extending the work of recovery, former research assistants, and our amazing research assistants, research fellows who continue to work on all of the projects that we do, Maria, Roselia, Elias, and Julio. And thank you again, Paige, for your generosity. We had over 200 people register for this event, and we're very excited about this. We will be sharing this and making this available on social media, and it'll be available for anybody to use. And so we hope that you continue to be well, and I hope everybody had a good time.
Thank you all so much for the wonderful questions and the participation. It's so challenging to do workshops to make them interactive in these virtual environments, and I appreciated all of you playing along. Oh.
Gracias. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you all.